Good evening, folks. Can I have your attention, please? I'd like to introduce our two guest speakers tonight. They're going to talk about Edward Ferry. First up is Michael O'Malley. He's a mountain host and hiking guide at Deer Valley, and also a museum volunteer. Michael's been very interested in Park City mining history since he first came here in 1980 to go on a ski trip, back when our skis were long and skinny, and ski brakes on bindings were pretty new. Michael is a frequent contributor to The Way We Were column in the Park Record. He's also a member of Friends of Ski Mountain Mining History. Sandy Brumley, his partner in crime, is a mountain guide, mountain host and hiking guide at Park City Resort. And Sandy is a descendant of iron miners in Minnesota. Minnesota. How about them Vikings, huh? Are you a Vikings fan? Giants, okay. How'd that happen? Oh, okay. And Sandy is also an avid student of Park City mining history. Is this your sixth lecture? It's okay. I've been blessed to do a couple with Sandy, and it's always a learning experience for me, learning about these individuals in our mining past, the movers and shakers. Anyway, Sandy is also a member of Friends of Ski Mountain Mining History and a hike leader in the summer for the museum. Without further ado, please welcome Michael and Sandy.
Well, we're actually here today because of Michael's hiking background. One of the first hikes I did with the Park City Museum, I followed Michael up the hill to the Flagstaff, and he made a comment on that hike that kind of stuck with me, which is why we're here today. He sort of tossed Edward Ferry off as less of a miner and more of a businessman. And while I'm pretty sure that Edward never swung a single jack, he very much had many mining interests, and so that's what led me to recruit Michael after I wore a mark out.
What Sandy is really trying to tell you is I speak with great confidence, but not always accuracy. So you've been warned, right? And Sally, Larry, you know, if our flights of fancy get too ethereal, you pull us back.
And please, we're very interested in comments, questions throughout. We do have a fairly complicated conversation today because, in fact, Ferry was a very complicated fellow. Many business interests in the town, and also a very dramatic turn of events in his health that Michael, sleuthed out for us. So we're gonna run through the business interests, we're gonna run through the health interests, and then we're gonna come back at the end and try to tie it back together to put it into a picture. So see how that's, hey, there we go. Edward P. Ferry. His father actually was a Presbyterian minister in Michigan. Michael's gonna dive a little more deeply into that. But he was also a member of a kind of a powerhouse family. The father was an entrepreneur, a capitalist, and indeed Ferry and his brother William Montague were kind of recruited by other capitalists out here in the West to come to Park City, so they're referred to as the Michigan Bunch in a very famous history book here in Park City. There's the Treasure Mountain Home. Michigan Bunch is a term coined by those historians. They were known in their era as members of the Marsac Company. And so they had Marsac Mill, Marsac Land Company, and we'll dive into some of that stuff. he was also, in the end, a very great benefactor to the town as well. So we don't want to lose sight of that.
Well, you're the top theme here.
All right. So yeah. So so our first theme is really there's a great fortune that was built, but a phrase I'm going to steal from Sally. Many times a great fortune begins with a minor crime. So we're going to talk about that minor crime. What was that along the way? And then there's
Well, and then I take my theme for my part of the talk from Tolstoy, and as we know, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, and the Ferry family and Edward's life in particular is lunacy, litigation, and loss. He was a great businessman, as you'll learn. He was a tragic figure in many ways, and the more I've learned about him, part of me says, "What a bastard," and then another part of me says, "Oh, how sad." He had some trials, and Anna Karenina is a particularly good foreshadowing because, as you remember, she threw herself in front of the train. And Edward may have tried to throw himself off a train. So it all comes around. So what do we have? Okay, so the first thing you got to know about the Ferry family is they have too many William Montagues. All right? This is a complicated story, and they're partly to blame. So we're going to talk about the Reverend, first generation. We're going to talk about the Colonel, his son, William. And then we're going to talk about one of Edward's sons, W. Mont Ferry, who became, he ran the Silver King. He became mayor of Salt Lake. So anyway, too many William Monts, so we'll be Reverend, Colonel, and Mayor. Everybody got that? Okay. But the Reverend was born in Granby, Massachusetts, one town over from where Porter Rockwell was born, and 2 towns over from where I was born. There's no correlation between any of those facts. But had lots of kids. And Mary and Edward were twins. And pay attention to Amanda. She's going to circle back in the story. All right? But oh, geez. Okay, hang on. There we go. So the Reverend was a devout Presbyterian, and the church sent him out to the very top of the Michigan Mitten, to Mackinac Island, and he was to preach to the mostly French-Canadian fur traders and their mixed progeny, because there are a lot of Native Americans in that area as well. So primarily a Catholic stronghold. And so the church sent the Reverend and his wife out there. While he was out there preaching, he started to exercise his business muscles. And probably the first big attempt was running a fleet of schooners to trade along the shores of Lake Michigan. The mission was not entirely successful. In the first 8 years, he got about 25 converts. So eventually, the church said, you know what, we're going to close down the mission. This was about the same time that the Reverend met Robert Stewart of the American Fur Company. Anyone read the story of Astoria? So he plays a role in that. And he was now based in Mackinac, and he converted to Presbyterianism, and he encouraged the Reverend to go south, and even backed him with some money and the Reverend bought about 8,000 or 9,000 acres of timberland near what became Grand Haven. Ferry started a church there and preached in that church for many years, but his focus was really going towards business, and he had a number of sons. And Sally, yes?
An interesting aside that I learned many years ago was that they came in after the purchase of Louisiana from France, but the Indians wanted nothing to do with Presbyterians because they didn't drink. But the French priests were most generous with their libations.
I don't have
The
anything.
Indians preferred Catholicism because it included alcohol.
I have very little to do with Presbyterians myself, so for much the same reason.
And I'm a Presbyterian who my wife says drinks too much. So
Yeah. So the and Ferry involved his sons in merchant business, in timber, in banking, and eventually even Colonel, second generation, he started the ironworks. He actually was a very talented engineer, held about a dozen patents in sawmill technology and things like that. So very interesting guy. Civil War comes, and this is the first real tragic blow in the Ferry family. Middle son Noah was a well-regarded officer in the Union Army. His regiments held off for 3 hours a foray by Jeb Stuart at Gettysburg, and the Union troops were running out of ammunition, and Noah rallied him, but in the process of rallying him was shot down by an enemy soldier. Colonel, also served in the Union Army. Interesting thing here is, again, talented engineer, good soldier, but he started to show signs of instability in later life. In the 80s, he ended up in sanitariums in Europe for a number of years and was rumored to have some morphine problems as well. Thomas, another son, proved to be the real political power in the family. He ultimately became president of the U.S. Senate and served as Grant's acting vice president. We're going to get back to that. But the scouting report on Thomas was political sense, absolutely. Business sense, not so much. And Edward showed a talent for business. Even though he was the youngest, he was running during the Civil War a lot of the businesses for the family. That's one reason he didn't serve. Another reason he didn't serve is in 1862, he suffered an injury to his hand from a loaded pistol. Now the family said, just an accident, nothing to see here, move along. But we'll come back to this and say, was it an accident? I can speculate that he was beginning to show signs of instability even in his 20s. Politics, again, all three were savvy. And I think the message on this slide is that when you think about people like Kearns and Hearst, who became U.S. senators later in life, these guys came to Park City already fully politicized. They were political animals. They knew what was going on. So I guess that's probably the main point of that slide. And now, my friend will take over.
all right. So we're going to look at the early timeline here in Park City. We're focused on a couple of different things. Early on, there were a couple of guys named Howland who were here in Utah. They were developers in California, miners, and manufacturers of mining equipment. And they came to Utah, and in particular Park City early on. There was actually a mining district called the Howland Mining District that was part of their background. And Howland himself went back east and recruited people to come west and develop. He was looking for capitalists, guys with money, because of course, to develop these mines, you got to have some money to invest. And while there's no specific evidence, it seems pretty likely that that's how the Ferry's interests were sparked to come to town. Because they came to town and the Michigan bunch, if you will, the Marsac Company, they immediately began working very closely with the Howlands. The Howlands show up as originating the Flagstaff mine claim, and I know there's some verbal lore about the town, about how the soldiers found the mine, and also in Thompson and Buck, they report that there were some other people that had title to the claim at some point. But when you go back to the claims books themselves, Howland originated the Flagstaff claim, and then fairly quickly sold it off to these guys from Michigan. And so he was particularly working closely with one of Ferry's associates, a guy named Nims. Nims and Howland formed a company to develop that mine and several others, and they established a very close working relationship. By December of 1872, Nims had already formed this new mining company. And so this is well before actually the big spark here in Park City and what Mark and I have spoken about. It's really Chambers' arrival and the connection to George Hearst that caused the big silver rush. So these guys were in early and they took great advantage of arriving early. One of the things that they did, okay, this is actually not the busiest slide you're going to see, so I'm just trying to break you in. But let me, whoop. There we go. So I want to look at the map here. Let me use this pointer. This guy's a little better. So what we're looking at here is a map of Park City. It comes from a Golinsky mine claim map, but the map showed the city very clearly, some claims in the city. This is Ferry's Woodside mine, which is going to figure very prominently in our conversation in a little bit, very close to town. But what you see is that there are 4 40-acre blocks. And what they did, Howland actually located those blocks for Nims, and then Nims purchased them with some scrip. Right? So scrip is kind of a form of money. In this case, it was literally called, it was issued by the Minnesota legislature, and it was called Sioux half-breed scrip, so not particularly politically correct, but that's what it says right on the specie. And what that scrip did was compensate these half-breeds in Minnesota for some injustice that was done for them. Don't know what that was, but it could be used to purchase land like this. So Nims made that purchase, and then the intention obviously was to, hey, really take advantage of the real estate play here in town. So it's always been a town where real estate's been important, going back to the very beginning. So in December, the Marsac mill opens with 12 stampers. It's actually Howland who first builds the mill, but then he quickly sells it to the Ferries. There are about 25 homes in town by that point, so not very many people. Population maybe 300 in that era. But interestingly, then in 1875, Nims goes and substitutes a different form of scrip called Valentine scrip. This scrip was issued to a gentleman named Valentine because the state of California basically took over his property in the location that became Torrance, California. And so we'll drill more deeply into why that's important in just a second. But you'll notice that right here is the Ontario Mill in part of the town. The Marsac Mill is right inside town, and the Park City Smelter is kind of partly in and out of town. You've got a mine claim that comes into town. So while it was the town, it was also Section 16, which in those days was not only a town site, but it was a site where certain lands were granted for schools and universities. So it was clearly the important place of town. So moving along, get back to my other clicker here. The Ferries were very willing to use Washington connections to support their. I think I skipped a slide, didn't I?
You skipped the slide.
Yeah. No. Yeah, there we go. Obviously, the intention of securing those plots are basically to be able to sell the land that's underneath. And indeed, when the ferries started to try to do that, the people who were already here were not that happy about it, right? I've already got my store, my bar, my saloon, my butcher shop, and so the immediate reaction was a little bit of a riot. That's what the newspapers referred to it. A fellow named John Street was the principal antagonist to the ferries. He was a member of the Presbyterian Church, so they had battles inside the presbytery. But he also battled them pretty heavily about this land grant because he was one of the early arrivals. And he also organized another fellow named John Nelson to participate with him in something that became called the Red Hot Riot. The people were upset, obviously, about these guys trying to charge them for land that they were already on. They were not very accepting of it. Right about this time as well, as things are heating up around the land, the Hollands kind of disappear. They're not in the financial or the historic record anymore. They've kind of primed the pump in my sense, and what they're doing now is they're happy to sell as much mining equipment as they can.
And Sandy, my notes say that John Street was a lawyer and a butcher. And my notes say, insert lawyer joke here. Robin, Hope, anything? You got anything? Nothing? Okay, we'll move on.
So anyway, the ferries using these Washington connections, they lined President Grant up to write a letter for them on their behalf, declaring that yes, indeed, this town site deed is good. It's got the full faith and support of the presidential office at any rate. There's no mention in Grant's letter about the Valentine script, perhaps not surprising, but that's kind of the first nail in the coffin in Street's series of lawsuits. He eventually files 3 different lawsuits trying to protest this.
But we see the fix is in at the national level. It's probably the short version.
Yep.
So.
They did hire a fellow named E.W. Thayer to try to sell these parcels. Ferry was not, wanting to suffer the heat, if you will, of the land sales. So he brought in this agent Thayer. He tried, diligently to sell parcels. Probably sold a few. But then, the folks got angry and kind of ran him out of town. There was one incident where they sought him out, tried to tar and feather him, and he hid and avoided that fate. But I love the newspaper report towards the end of 77 that reports that Thayer was sent back east with instructions to stay there. So it basically went from red hot to fizzle. How did that come about? There's Thompson and Buck talk about this a little bit, but we went back and looked into the actual cases. One of the cases is on file, and you can access it by fold 3. And this is one of the documents that's in the case file. There's a multi-page list of all of the land sales that happened. And so there's an interesting pattern in that land sale. You notice right here. Let me get the right pointer. Right here, you've got a sale to John Nelson. He's one of the prominent players. He's also a Union colonel from the war. But there's no price for the land sale. You've also got, not surprisingly perhaps, that the Marsac and Company, there was a land transfer done there. Also, so no price charged. And then also, equally prominently, here on that same page is a sale to the Ontario for that little portion of the land that's in town. And so, my sense reading between the lines, we kind of talked about this a fair bit, and Michael actually wrote a fabulous article for the Park Record, which is in the current edition, that talks about this in some detail. But I think the general sense is what the ferries did was they kind of put their arms around the right power players, Nelson, Chambers, and once they established that, yes, it was a legitimate deal, you got people paying money for the land, basically they managed to sell the properties.
And the Street took it to the court all the way to the Supreme Court and lost. This is also happening in the early 1880s. Remember Thomas, not a very good businessman. Businesses back in Michigan are starting to crumble under his guidance. And Edward had to deploy funds to shore that up. That turned into another Supreme Court case involving Thomas and a gentleman named Dowling. They had floated close to $1 million in promissory notes, so big money back then. And but what Sandy mentioned, the Way We Were article from last week. I want to thank Dalton and the Park Record for keeping the opening line, which was, even from the early days, real estate has been a contact sport around these parts. So.
All right, so, whoops. How does it finally resolve? This is the cover page on that list of property transfers, and what I did was go through, just add it up, how much was spent to that point in time. It was a total sale of about $32,000 for the property, about $770,000 in current dollars. So not a bad chunk of change, but not enough to retire on in those days, perhaps, if you wanted to be a member of the Gilded Age. But what's really important about the timing of this cash flow is this is just really, as the ferries are coming to town, they're trying to establish themselves. If they've got that kind of cash flow coming in, they are able to redirect that cash into other properties, and that's exactly what they do. And so here's an even more complicated slide. We're not there yet. We're not to the most complicated one. But what we're going to look at, just a quick overview of the various properties. Woodside Mine is owned by Edward P. The Sampson Mine, the Boss Mine, the Crescent Mine. He's got a little bit of a position in that, but plays a great role in kind of brokering a dispute that's happening around that mine. Colonel Ferry has a mining property that's way out by the Jupiter Bowl. The Anchor Mine up on the Deer Valley property right alongside of the Orion Trail. The Ontario Mine just kind of here as to show where all these bets are being placed on the table, right? So this guy's got different partners, different mines all around town, and so I think this is what earns him, to my mind, the true capitalist moniker, right? Because you've got people like Chambers focusing entirely on the Ontario. You've got Daly focusing entirely on Empire Canyon, but you've got Ferry putting bets on the table all around town. So we're going to kind of tip kind of one by one through the mines and talk in a little further detail. Flagstaff Mine, actually not very much of a performer at all. The ferries are involved with it for a while. It's the place where the first shipments happened, but it's only the first. Eventually, they kind of begin to walk away from it. They license the property to a few other participants along the way, but in the end, nobody really made much money from the Flagstaff. And we see here just a photograph from the 20s or 30s, judging from the truck. People continued to work it, but never much of an impact. The Crescent Mine, this is a mine where Ferry had a big role in kind of brokering a dispute, right? Because there were multiple claims, all in the very close same area. The Crescent Mine, by the way, was located right, if you're a skier, right where Single Jack and Double Jack come together. So it's kind of up on the canyon a little bit, right up above the Thane's Chair. And all of those nice smooth ski runs are actually mine waste from the mine itself. So the mine was a quick kind of flash in the pan, right? It came on stream in about 1885. So it's really in the boom time of the early Park City development. This great photo is after the Crescent tram has gone into place, and you can kind of tell probably mainly from those big piles of lumber that are up there. But there is the tram line coming around, touching into that. And And at one point, the Crescent was actually the best performing mine. You can see that little snippet there where they're shipping over 1 million pounds of ore, in contrast to some of the other big mines, down in the 500,000 range. So the other thing that everybody in Park City knows about is, of course, the Crescent tram. There we go. This is more of interest just to, I think, skiers. I was pleasantly pleased to find out that that shot there, the tram coming around the corner, I got a couple of different map locators that show where exactly that was. It's right at the bottom of the Treasure Hollow run, and would have come around right across the front of Waterfall. And today it still exists as a biking trail. There's the CMG trail, Crescent Mine Grade, and by the time you get this far down on it, you can ride it all the way from where the Crescent Mine was, all around the mountain, past Miners Camp. When you get down into this zone, they've sort of stopped following the old Crescent Mine Grade, and there's some new stuff in there, some really nice swoopy turns if you're a rider. The Marsac and Crescent Mills here in town. It's a little hard to read this. I got this slide nicely put together by Brian Buck. Here's the railroad coming into town, the Ontario Mill way up the hill, the Marsac Mill kind of where we saw it on the map, the Crescent just below it right next to the Park City smelter. And here's just a drawing from the Sanborn fire maps that show where those two things were located. You would know it if you're coming down from Royal Street, and on the right-hand side, there's a big truck ramp, runaway truck ramp. That truck ramp is going right up the mine tailings. And so the mill was right below that. And then below that, you'll see on the right-hand side, the Ontario No. 1 tunnel comes out, and then there was a train siding that came in there that was known as the High Line. So it's kind of right there. But
Is this looking north or south?
that is looking south. So you're at the bottom end of town. Here's where the new restaurant is. It used to be Zoom. Now what's it called? Going to open soon, I guess. And that Ontario Mill really up at the high end of town. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Sampson and the Boss mines. Two different mines. They started at different times. The Sampson was first. They both, like all Park City mines, had tremendous water problems. So a tunnel was done for the Sampson on its own. These two mines also benefited greatly by an early tunnel, the Hanauer Tunnel. And so financial obligations were incurred. By that point, the miners were realizing, hey, if I'm digging a tunnel and it's draining your property, you ought to be paying for that, right? So deals were made and debts were incurred. Ultimately, the two mines interacted pretty well. You could get to one from the other inside the tunnels, but the Sampson mine went under because of debts owed to Hanauer. Then ultimately, these things were rolled into another company that Thomas Kearns and David Keith put together alongside the Silver King, but ultimately they all rolled into the Silver King. And then the Alliance mine is the successor to the Hanauer Tunnel in some sense, right? You had all these mines up in Treasure Hill. So if you're going up Woodside Gulch, it's everything to the right, right? So what we call Treasure Hill, Treasure Mountain today, and that big pile of rock there at the bottom is the waste rock from the Alliance Tunnel that drove pretty much up underneath that canyon and benefited all the mines that were on that North Canyon face. There's still evidence of it today. There's that half building that's up there, and the watchman's cabin is up in that section of Empire Canyon where the Walker-Webster Gulch comes down. Okay. The Anchor Mine, further up the hill, it's kind of above the properties that John Daly put together. And Brian Buck and I will be back to talk about the daily developments, Daily 1, Daily 2, Daily West. This is in this presentation because Ferry was a founder. Daily was a participant in it. And as I mentioned, it's located right off the edge of the Orion Ski Trail. After you come off the top of Empire, come down about probably, I don't know, 600-800 vertical feet, and then you're there. This was a tunnel or a mine that had a tremendous engineering challenge to it. Daly was hired to dig what was originally called the Anchor Tunnel. These days, most people refer to it as the Judge Tunnel. That tunnel was driven up there as early as 1889, reached its destination, and his contract was fulfilled. But then there was a large drama about how do you connect the mine shaft to that tunnel. And Brian Buck has an interesting paper that he's done on that talks about the challenge of drilling the hole down and drilling it so that it actually hit the tunnel, because it would veer off in other directions. So, but again, this was a property that worked very well, generated a lot of income for the Ferries and a lot of wealth. The Woodside mine is the one that really sprang the Ferries into their closest connection with the Silver King. It was located originally in 1873. It was one of the early mine locations here in town. Ferry bought in early, but he didn't work it too actively. He licensed it at one point to Nelson. And then there's a colorful story about a couple of guys, George Northey and William Stevens, who licensed the mine. They managed to dig up a fair bit of ore, decided to carry it down to Salt Lake City to have it refined, and then drank the proceeds and left town. So it wasn't really until so Thomas Kearns had a key role in developing this mine. As the story goes, he studied closely the mine claims and how things were going there in Woodside Gulch. And he convinced Ferry to hire him to dig a different tunnel into the property. When he did dig the tunnel, he hit a major vein that in fact continued on up the hill into the next set of claims, the Mayflower claims. And so the Mayflower was really, it was the Mayflower partners that brought Tom Kearns together with David Keith, William Bryce, another member of this Marsac Company, the Michigan bunch, John Judge, and then also quite famously Emery, Albion Emery, the husband of the Silver Queen. So the Mayflower mine quickly developed. Both of these mines were running independently, generating lots of income right away. The thing they realized was that, in fact, that Mayflower claim, the vein extended further up the canyon and into the Silver King claims, and that's really what led to the formation of the Silver King mine. There we go. So the Silver King becomes the largest single producing mine of Park City. This is a little table that Donovan put together, and was very profitable. The silver that was in the mine was so strong and so pure that oftentimes they could just ship the ore directly to the smelters. This is a photograph from around 1898. It's the first version of the mill of the mine. And basically, the Silver King was the basis for the roll-up clay, right? For Wall Streeters today, that they bought all of the surrounding properties because they were most efficiently able to mine it, and that's really what brought Ferry into the Silver King as a business owner. Other Ferry ventures, he continued, as I say, to be a capitalist. He built the Union concentrator originally just to refine ore for his Woodside mine. This is actually kind of down and around the corner in Empire Canyon. And he did work for a couple of other mining companies as well in terms of milling and refining. He also was into public utilities. His Marsac mill, it was fairly easy to throw in some electric generators and start generating power for the town, and it was well located to distribute power about the town. He also was interested in water. This is a shot looking down Empire Canyon, and we were talking about the Union concentrator earlier. There it is on the edge of Empire Canyon, and here's the water coming as down, what is called Silver Creek or Poison Creek these days. There was a creek there back then. There was also, by the time of 1891, probably water coming out of that Judge Tunnel feeding this, and the Alliance Tunnel. So he was capturing the water, and hopefully they were using it mostly for that mill, but I think people were probably drinking it too. So. And now we're going to switch gears, talk about a different thread.
To put a bow around it,
Yes.
a lot of this activity in all these different mines was happening in the 1880s.
Mm-hmm.
And they, as you say, they ultimately gravitate into the orbit of the Silver King.
Yep.
And so all the bets that Ferry placed, and his brother, the colonel, is involved as well, start to pay off in the 90s.
Early 90s, yep.
Yeah. And at the so back to the juicy stuff. Really at the right in the middle of the red hot riot time. So fairly early with Edward's time in town, and the bet placing. He's going back by train to Michigan to help Thomas, the ne'er-do-well business person and senator, and he experiences on the train in Illinois a bout of brain fever. The family gets in front of this story right away, and they stonewall it. You can see right here, the statement telegraphed from Grant. Pay no attention to that. Nothing here. It was idle rumor. They wanted to protect the senator as much as anything from this news. When I called Jeanette Whedon, the research librarian in Grand Haven, and I said, Jeanette, I hear there's that E.P. Ferry had some suicidal tendencies. Oh, he almost threw himself off the train. Really, she got really excited. Now,
Almost like Sally, right?
yeah. Now, Jeanette did not actually find anything. She sent me some great stuff, but nothing that said he tried to commit suicide. Sally, you've been to Grand Haven. Is it worth me going back there, or is is it?
You can have my notes.
Okay. And there's a question for Sandra. If I share unsubstantiated local lore from another town, does it impact my credibility here? No. Okay. Good. All right. So the message here on this slide is, for another literary allusion, the lady doth protest too much. The family really, again, got out in front of this news. Next big tragedy in the Ferry saga. About 4 years later, Edward has married his cousin from Grand Haven, Clara. They're in Park City. They're riding horses up to Shadow Lake in Jupiter, and the horse rears. She falls off, hits her head, and ultimately dies during the rescue. So she was conscious but completely paralyzed. Edward tried to help her, but he got jumbled up in the stirrups and sprained his ankle. And then I throw in a little thing about the phone. Remember, the museum does a good job of saying Park City was one of the earliest towns in Utah to get phone service, and this was an early use of that technology. But Clara dies suddenly, and Edward's got to raise a couple of kids by himself. Okay, where are we? Let's see. They would have been. Oh, hold that thought. We've got a slide that shows his age at some of these things. I think he was in his 40s at that point. But now, fast forward a decade, and he has another major episode. Okay, so he's made it through most of the 80s. He's made it through most of that bet placing without making the news. He may have had his ups and downs, but it wasn't until 1892 that he had a big episode of mental instability. So I categorize the 90s as his lost decade. Now, things have come to a head business-wise in the Silver King, but he's sort of stepping away. He spends some time in an asylum. His associate, David Irwin, takes over a lot of the business decisions. And then at the end of that lost decade, Edward has another episode. And by this time, his sons, Ned and Mayer, remember, Reverend Colonel Mayer, they assume, they get him declared incompetent and assume control of the estate. Now we'll go into a little more detail on the Ferry family lawsuit. When Reverend died in 1867, Edward was named executor of the estate. And in 1901, Ned and Mayer sue David Irwin, the business associate, for mishandling the business affairs of Ferry and, by extension, the Ferry Family Trust. They get an incompetence declaration. This lawsuit is settled out of court. But then in an ironic turn of fate, Amanda, one of the sisters in the second generation, and her husband sue the sons, actually sue the estate to get Edward officially removed as executor or trustee and provide a complete estate accounting, the same thing they had accused Irwin of not doing, and appoint a Michigan Trust Company as the administrator. They said that in the back and forth, they said Edward fails to submit an account of the estate, and the counterclaim was, well, you never asked.
It also means the estate was open for 35 years.
Yeah. Which leads to, Mont, again, Mayer and Ned, they file a cross petition against Amanda and her husband, and the Michigan courts say, hey, look, Ed, you made $1.2 million off of this. You're only entitled to a quarter of that. Send us $900,000 back to the family estate. Now, the sons win an appeal in Utah and an appeal in Denver, but ultimately it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, in the decade, another lost decade, this is the legal ping pong that it takes to get those court cases to the Supreme Court by 1913. Okay? Now, when I posted This Way We Were, I put it on LinkedIn, and Brian, my financial advisor, reposted that in LinkedIn. What was your comment?
I just mentioned, I think I did one about the real estate. As you mentioned, obviously, real estate is independent. But in relation to the trust, make sure that you have your trust affairs and visit with your estate planning attorney. Make sure you know who's in charge of making decisions if you're not around or if you're
So that's your public service announcement for tonight. Otherwise, you're going to be in this rat nest, okay? And, whoop, come on, back. There we go. There. Okay, how it all comes together. Again, 10 years later, Supreme Court overrules and sides with Michigan. And so now the estate has to come up with the money. They don't have all of it. And the ruling, which was written by Oliver Wendell Holmes, really sets a precedent for family trust administration. Ned, one of the sons of Edward, shoots himself, commits suicide the next day. Now the family says, oh, it was because of insomnia. So again, they're stonewalling everything. So, but again, a tragic turn of events in this family. And by this time, Edward is still alive. He lives another 4 years, but he's in a private home. He's bouncing between Park City and Southern California.
Is he insane?
Okay, so I spoke to Paul Trapp, who is a Michigan historical researcher associated with the Grand Haven Library. And he said the family never disclosed what his illness was. They stonewalled everything. And he speculates that it was bipolar, because he said, you look over Edward's career, he had moments of brilliance and moments of utter failure and despair. Yeah. So we don't know. We do know on the death certificate, when he was 79 years old, senile dementia is written. I didn't know that was a cause of death. I thought it was sort of a company, but that's what the death certificate said in LA. Yeah. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. Okay. Did I get that? Oh, okay. So tying it all together, help me out here.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it's fascinating that he has this gun accident early on, right? This puts a different cast, I think, on the gun accident. Was it intentional? Was it a way to avoid the Civil War? I mean, he could have just paid somebody to go fight it instead, but there is that incident. Then, right in the middle of this township dispute, obviously a pretty hot thing. People are rioting. They're refusing to pay the rent on the property. That's when he has the brain fever. We have this additional complication that you uncovered with Thomas kind of tanking the Michigan businesses. Mm-hmm. Fair bit of pressure there. Then into the 1880s, when he's really placing all of those bets throughout Park City, that's when Clara dies. They were very, very close. It was prominent and well known, but perhaps what he's doing here is throwing himself into it, right? He's lost his wife. He's just going to throw himself into that. But to me, the most ironic thing is, you get to 1892, Silver King has just taken off, right? All these bets, they're coming in. It's happening, and that's when he just loses it altogether.
Yeah, what I take away is how productive he was in the 1880s. Despite his liabilities. So we'll close on one more literary allusion. Are you? Who's who?
You could be Fitz.
I'll be Fitzgerald. So the rich are different than us.
Yes, they have more money.
Yeah, that's right. But again.
But once you have the money, then you got something to fight over, right?
That's right.
So there we go.
That's right. But he spread his business interests. We don't know much about the slide. I think that'll take a trip to Grand Haven and dig into some dusty boxes. And wealth does not make you immune to tragedy. So anyway.
Well, thank God, Michael, that neither of us is wealthy.
Yes. So.
And that's what we got.
Larry.
When Carol and I got here in the 1970s, one of the leaders of the Utah State Senate was Ferry. Cat Ferry, and his other nickname was Mont. So
He must be related. I'm going to go look at it.
He was in Utah politics in the 1970s,
Yes. Wow.
but you didn't come across it.
I didn't come across anything.
We
like
yeah, we
that.
didn't pull it that far, but
Mary? The Ferry Mansion. Yeah, I mean, you want to just. No, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that much about it. And that was the Colonel's house. Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's said to be the biggest house in Park City. And Colonel Monty Ferry, we own a home in Salt Lake that we bought for his daughter. And it said, and if you drive down 7th East, between 4th South and 5th South, it stands along with everything coming down around it, which used to be modern display.
Oh.
It's soon to be the next Salt Lake City house.
Okay. Okay. And the Colonel,
And Jeanette,
yes,
their daughter,
right.
Hollister,
Okay.
Terry Hancock,
Yep.
and her husband moved in with their 3 kids.
And there's a whole different lecture about what they did to get Westminster going.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of it happened in the house we have.
Wow.
ah,
Wow. Oh, was that where the discussion about where are we going to get the money to start the school that happened there? Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
are we going to recruit
Oh,
her to lecture with us?
Okay.
Ferry building on
On Westminster. Yep. Yeah. Is that building still extant? Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the Ferry family, as Sandy mentioned, were benefactors to Utah, as were many. Yep.
Our house on Upper Park Avenue, I have research, it was built in 1895, but the original owner was Ferry. From the Colville.
Edward or Colonel, one of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so they must have owned part of the town as well. As some of the lots.
Yep. Yeah.
I'll go off one more at Salt Lake. My son is a freshman in Judge, and for the incoming parents at Judge, they do a huge presentation on how the Judge family, and it was the female, right, because the male, he died, right, he died very young, and she was very philanthropic, and it started out as a hospital, and then the school, but the Judge down in Salt Lake all came from Park City.
Money. Yeah.
totally different subject. I sort of missed the dots as to what the Supreme Court ruling that made a precedent in Family Trust Administration, exactly what was the precedent said.
Do we have a lawyer in the house? Don, I have to confess, I haven't read the entire, judgment the brief that, come back next week. I'll know. Yeah.
The sequel presentation.
But probably publish regular records would probably be the precedent. So would be my guess. So
You're a tour guide. You can make stuff
I
up.
can make stuff up. Yeah, I can speak very confidently on this one. So anybody?
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Here, turn.
We can probably